So what's the purpose of this military presence around the globe? It's a great question. In short, I think empire is part of the answer.
And that's why you can't talk about how many bases the United States has without talking about what those bases actually represent. US imperialism. While it's true that US military bases expanded dramatically after World War II, the US actually started exerting its power and influence outside its borders in the early 1800s. In 1823, the United States adopted a cornerstone of its foreign policy, the Monroe Doctrine. This policy opposed European colonization and established the Western Hemisphere as the US's own sphere of influence. This helped lay the groundwork for the US to develop a taste for militarily intervening and invading, like intervening in the Cuban War of Independence in 1898 and occupying Spanish colonies, or engaging in a war with the Filipino revolutionaries just a year after that. Now, obviously, the US didn't stop there. After World War II, the American government both expanded military bases and established itself as a dominant power with the self-proclaimed right to militarily intervene across the globe. It sent troops to occupy Southern Korea in 1945, with the Vietnam War kicking off in 1955. The US kept deploying its military anywhere it felt threatened, often by left-leaning governments. Latin America is an example of this. The region experienced American interventionism and involvement in regime change multiple times. By the end of the Cold War, there were 1,600 US military bases in 40 countries and colonies. Today, the number of military bases is half that, but the number of countries and colonies that host these bases have doubled. Japan and Germany still have 119 US bases. South Korea has 76. It's important to note, included in these 750 bases outside the US are US territories where citizens don't have the same rights as mainland US citizens, like Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa.
We can think of these bases as kinds of colonies. These are sort of mini micro colonies from which the US government and to a certain extent US corporations can exert power in the world.
You're looking at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Large bases like Ramstein are often referred to as Little Americas. Ramstein has American schools, apartment complexes, American fast food restaurants like Popeyes and Taco Bell, and many other American products. Over 400 overseas US bases are large bases with more than 200 military personnel. The rest are small bases, or lily pads, that usually hold drones, surveillance aircraft, or pre-positioned weaponry and supplies. These are largely found in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Professor Vine argues US foreign bases are simply launch pads for war, like this drone site in Niger, this airstrip in the Galapagos Islands, and this base in Djibouti, which is used to launch airstrikes in Somalia. This strategy of exerting power comes at a cost. Since 2001, the US has spent close to $6 trillion on wars. To put this spending in perspective, it could have housed the entire homeless population in the US and ended world hunger. And it's not just financially costly. Over 800,000 people have died due to post-9/11 wars in the Middle East.
It needs to be dismantled. We need to dismantle the system of war, and we need to dismantle the power of the military-industrial complex. And unless we do, we are in deep, deep trouble, because I most of all fear the United States will end up in even more catastrophic wars than the catastrophic wars that we have been waging since 2001.
This brings up the looming possibility of a new war with China over Taiwan. US troops have been secretly training military forces in Taiwan, even though the US formally recognizes Taiwan as part of China.
Future wars should be simply unthinkable for our nation. There is widespread belief that anything the US military does in the world must be good and must be protecting the United States and protecting people around the world. And unfortunately, the opposite has all too frequently been the case.
And that is part of a bigger problem. US foreign bases have displaced millions of people. For example, Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is a US base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The US government conspired with the UK to illegally remove the entire local population in order to build the base. On top of that, many people in other host countries have consistently protested the presence of the US military. In Shannon, Ireland, residents have been protesting to halt the US military's use of Shannon Airport to transport arms. In 2009, the president of Ecuador refused to renew the license for a US base, stating the US military had too much control in his country.
Mire, si quiere, yo lo renuevo con una condición, que me permitan poner una base militar ecuatoriana aquí en Nueva York. Si no hay ningún problema en tener bases extranjeras, entonces vamos a llegar a un acuerdo, ¿verdad?
Now, contrary to what the Pentagon portrays, closing overseas bases is relatively easy because Congress doesn't need to be involved in the closures. Previous presidents have done it. Both Bushes and Bill Clinton closed hundreds of bases in Europe and Asia in the 90s and 2000s. This means the Biden administration could easily close hundreds of unnecessary military bases abroad, if it wanted to, that is. But it's not just a matter of closing a few bases, it's about questioning the role the United States plays in global politics, and how it uses its military force to get what it wants.
I think the world would be more peaceful, and I think the US people would be more secure if the United States had fewer military bases abroad. And after 20 years of disastrous warfare, this is a state of affairs that really should bring us all deep pause and fundamental transformation in our approach to engaging with the rest of the world.